My wife's cancer treatment cost $290,000. I sold everything. Our house, my car, even my wedding ring with no help from her family. She survived, then immediately filed for divorce. Iota want a real man now. She laughed, taking half of what little I had left, and full custody of our children. Broken, I moved into a motel. That night, a knock on my door changed everything. The woman standing there said, "You know what nobody tells you about hitting rock bottom? It's not some dramatic movie moment where you're sprawled on a bathroom floor clutching a whiskey bottle while sad piano music plays in the background. Nah, real rock bottom is way more pathetic than that. It's quieter, lonelier, and in my case, it smelled like a disturbing combination of cigarette smoke that wasn't even mine and whatever mystery meat came in those 99-cent cans of beans I'd been living off for the past 3 months. Add to that the lovely ambience of a flickering neon motel sign right outside my window that buzzed like a dying wasp every 11 seconds. Yeah, I counted, and you've got yourself the complete Carter Briggs experience, circa right now. The Sunset Valley Motel wasn't exactly the Ritz. Hell, it wasn't even the Motel 6. This place was what happened when a building gave up on life, but was too stubborn to just collapse already. The carpet had stains that probably had their own criminal records. The shower only had 2 temperatures, hypothermia and surface of the sun, and my room's main piece of furniture was a dented nightstand that I'd been using as a dinner table, desk, and occasionally a place to rest my forehead when the weight of my spectacularly screwed up life got too heavy. The American dream, ladies and gentlemen. Someone should really update the brochure. It was 2:13 in the morning when someone knocked on my door, which was already weird because nothing good happens at 2:13 a.m. That's like the witching hour for bad decisions and worse news. My first thought was that it had to be Jerry, the motel manager, coming to remind me that rent was due in 2 days and his sympathy for my situation had officially expired along with the leftover Chinese food in my mini fridge. Jerry was a decent enough guy, but he ran this place like a prison warden who'd watched too many mob movies. All business, no feelings, and a weird obsession with making sure everyone paid on time or hit the road. My second thought was that maybe it was Randy from room 112, the guy who got drunk every Thursday night like it was his actual job and regularly mistook my door for his ex-girlfriend's room. Last week he'd shown up at 3 in the morning singing Total Eclipse of the Heart and asking if I'd forgiven him for forgetting our anniversary. I didn't have the heart to tell him I was a divorced dude named Carter and not his ex-girlfriend Stephanie, so I just said, "Apology not accepted," and shut the door. He left me a half-eaten Snickers bar as a peace offering the next day. That's the kind of neighbor loyalty you get at the Sunset Valley. But when I dragged myself off the bed, which squeaked like a tortured mouse with every movement, and opened that door, I definitely wasn't expecting what I saw. Standing there in the flickering yellow light of the hallway was a woman who looked like she'd taken a wrong turn somewhere between a Manhattan law firm and reality. She wore a beige trench coat that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, carried a leather folder that screamed, "I have my life together," and had this polished, put-together vibe that made my stained white undershirt and 2-day stubble feel like a personal attack on civilization itself. Her dark hair was pulled back in one of those severe professional styles that says, "I don't have time for your nonsense," and her eyes were sharp, calculating, like she was already 3 steps ahead of whatever conversation we were about to have. She didn't flinch at the sight of me, which was impressive considering I looked like a cautionary tale about what happens when you give up on grooming and self-respect. She just stood there, confident as hell, like she knocked on sketchy motel doors at ungodly hours all the time. "Mr. Carter Briggs?" she asked, her voice smooth and professional, the kind of voice that belonged in boardrooms and courtrooms, not in a hallway that smelled like desperation and industrial strength cleaner. I leaned against the doorframe, partly because I was tired and partly because I was pretty sure this was some kind of fever dream and I needed the support. "Depends who's asking," I said, trying to sound casual despite the fact that my heart had decided to audition for a death metal drum solo. "If it's about money, I'm dead. Been dead for months. You'll have to take it up with my ghost, and I gotta warn you, he's broke too." The corner of her mouth twitched slightly, like she was considering whether I was funny or just sad. Probably both. "I'm not here for money," she said, and I felt a tiny bit of relief until she added, "I'm here about your wife." And just like that, the entire universe decided to slam on the brakes. My wife, Clara. The name I'd spent the last 6 months trying to surgically remove from my brain with varying levels of success, mostly failure. The woman who'd taken my heart, my money, my kids, my house, and apparently my will to live, then walked away like she was returning a defective toaster to Target. That wife. I must have gone pale or made some kind of face because the woman in the trench coat looked at me with something that might have been sympathy, though it was hard to tell. "May I come in?" she asked, and honestly, what was I going to say? No. Please deliver my latest life-ruining news in the hallway where Randy can hear it and add it to his drunk karaoke repertoire? I stepped back and let her in, watching as she took in my spectacular living situation with the kind of clinical assessment that made me want to apologize for existing. To her credit, she didn't comment on the stack of empty bean cans in the corner that I'd been meaning to throw out for 2 weeks, or the fact that my closet was literally just a pile of clothes on a chair, or that the only decoration in the entire room was a calendar from 2019 that I'd never bothered to replace, because what's the point of tracking time when every day feels exactly the same? She set her leather folder on my nightstand/dinner table, pushing aside a plastic fork and an expired coupon for Pizza Hut that I'd been saving for no logical reason. The folder landed with a soft thump that somehow sounded ominous, like it was full of papers that were about to explain exactly how much worse my life could get. "Mr. Briggs," she said, turning to face me with an expression that was all business. "My name is Isabella Cross. I'm a private investigator." She paused, letting that sink in, probably gauging whether I was the type to freak out or shut down. I went with option 3, stand there like an idiot. "Your wife doesn't know I'm here," she continued. "And before you ask, no, she didn't hire me. Someone else did. Someone who cares about you a lot more than you currently realize." I wanted to laugh at that because the list of people who gave a damn about me these days was shorter than my bank statement. "Lady, I don't know what you think you know about my wife, but unless you're here to tell me she won the lottery and feels guilty enough to share, I'm not interested in." "Your wife committed fraud," Isabella said, cutting through my rambling with the precision of a lawyer who'd heard every excuse in the book. "Extensive, calculated fraud. And you, Mr. Briggs, were her primary victim." The flickering motel light outside chose that exact moment to buzz extra loud, like the universe's way of adding a dramatic sound effect. I stood there, my brain trying to process what she'd just said, trying to make it make sense. Fraud. Victim. Clara. The words didn't want to fit together in any configuration that didn't make me feel like I was losing my mind. "I have proof," Isabella said quietly, tapping the folder. "Everything you need to know is in here. But I'm warning you right now, Mr. Briggs. What you're about to learn is going to change everything you thought you knew about the last 2 years of your life." I looked at that folder, then at her, then at the bean cans in the corner, and I thought about how I'd already lost everything. My business, my house, my kids, my dignity. What else was there to take? What else could possibly hurt? Turns out, I was about to find out. "All right," I said, my voice rough. "Show me." And that's when my second rock bottom started, which, for the record, is way worse than the first one. 6 months earlier, life was simple. And you know what? I'm learning that simple is one of those words you never appreciate until it's gone, like solvent, or happily married, or not living in a motel that doubles as a front for questionable activities. 6 months ago, I was Carter Briggs, owner and operator of Briggs Custom Homes, a small construction business right here in Colorado Springs that I'd built from the ground up, literally. Started with nothing but a used pickup truck, a toolbox my dad gave me when I turned 21, and the kind of stubborn determination that makes you think you can will success into existence through sheer force of early mornings and calloused hands. We weren't building mansions for tech billionaires or anything fancy like that. Nope, Briggs Custom Homes specialized in honest, solid work for honest, solid people. We built decks that didn't collapse when your Uncle Jerry had one too many beers at the 4th of July barbecue. We finished basements so families could have a man cave or a kid's playroom without taking out a second mortgage. We did kitchen renovations for couples who'd been saving up for 5 years and trusted us not to screw it up. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real work, and at the end of the day, I could drive past houses around town and think, yeah, I built that. My crew and I made that family's dream happen. That feeling's worth more than any paycheck, let me tell you. My wife Clara was, or at least I thought she was, the love of my life. We met at a friend's wedding when I was 26 and she was 24. One of those classic, our eyes met across the reception hall moments that you think only happens in romantic comedies written by people who've never actually been to a wedding. She was wearing this blue dress that matched her eyes, laughing at something her friend said, and when she caught me staring like an idiot, she didn't look away. She smiled. That smile hooked me faster than a catfish on a lazy Sunday, and I was done for. We dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard because we were too broke and too practical for anything fancier, and honestly, those early years were good. Really good. The kind of good that makes you believe in all that happily ever after garbage they sell you in fairy tales. We had 2 kids, and man, those kids were my entire world. Still are, even though I haven't seen them in 3 months thanks to a legal system that thinks a motel room isn't appropriate housing for weekend visits. Like heartbreak is appropriate for anyone, but whatever. Jake was 14, all arms and legs and teenage attitude. The kind of kid who thought football was less of a sport and more of a religion. That boy could tell you the stats of every Colorado high school quarterback going back 5 years, could diagram plays like he was coaching the NFL, and spent his weekends either practicing with his team or watching game footage like he was preparing for the bar exam. He got that intensity from me, that tunnel vision when you find something you love. I was proud of that kid in ways I didn't even have words for. Then there was Mila, 12 years old and basically an angel who accidentally got assigned to our chaotic family. That girl played violin like she was auditioning for Heaven's Orchestra, and I'm not even exaggerating. From the time she was 7 and we rented her first tiny violin. Couldn't afford to buy one outright. She practiced every single day without us having to nag her. Not once. She'd come home from school, grab a snack, and head straight to her room where we'd hear these beautiful, haunting melodies drifting through the house while I was making dinner or reviewing blueprints at the kitchen table. Clara used to joke that Mila was proof that at least one of our kids inherited actual talent instead of just my stubbornness and her tendency to overthink everything. We'd go to her recitals and sit in those uncomfortable auditorium chairs, and every single time she played, I'd get choked up. My daughter, making music that beautiful. How'd I get that lucky? My mornings back then started at 5:30 on the dot. I'm talking that annoying, disciplined, same routine every day kind of schedule that makes your friends think you're either incredibly responsible or incredibly boring. Alarm goes off. I'd stumble to the kitchen in my boxers and a t-shirt that had seen better decades, and I'd start the coffee maker. One of those basic Mr. Coffee machines that cost $20 at Walmart and had been faithfully serving me since 2011. While that was brewing, I'd throw some bacon in a pan because life's too short to skip bacon, and honestly, it was the only thing I could cook that the kids would actually eat without complaint. The whole house would fill up with that smell, that perfect combination of coffee and bacon that somehow makes you feel like you've got your life together even when you definitely don't. Clara would usually come down around 6, already dressed for her job at the elementary school where she worked as a teacher's aide. She'd pour herself coffee, steal a piece of bacon right out of the pan even though I'd swat her hand away, and without fail, I mean literally every single morning, she'd look at the kitchen floor and sigh. "Carter, you left sawdust on the floor again," she'd say, and I'd look down at the trail of evidence I'd tracked in from the garage where I'd been cutting trim the night before, and I'd give her my best sheepish grin. "Adds character to the tile," I'd say, and she'd roll her eyes, but she'd be smiling. That was our thing, that little domestic back and forth that probably annoyed the hell out of anyone who had to witness it, but felt like love to me. Life wasn't glamorous. Our house was a modest 3-bedroom ranch that I'd renovated myself over the years, fixing things as we could afford the materials. We drove cars that were paid off because we didn't believe in monthly payments if we could avoid them. Vacations were camping trips to the mountains, not flights to Hawaii. Clara clipped coupons, I bought tools secondhand, and we split a streaming service subscription with my brother Lance because paying for Netflix and Hulu felt excessive. But it was ours, you know? We'd built this life together, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, and I thought we were happy. I really did. I thought we were on the same page about what mattered. Family, stability, being there for our kids, building something solid even if it wasn't fancy. Shows what the hell I knew. It was a Tuesday afternoon in April when everything started to crumble. I remember it was Tuesday because Tuesdays were when my crew and I usually wrapped up any small jobs and prepped for the bigger projects starting midweek. We were at the Martinez house, finishing up a bathroom remodel that had turned into one of those nightmare projects where you open up a wall and discover the previous owner had apparently let a drunk orangutan do the original plumbing. My phone rang around 2:30, and when I saw Clara's name on the screen, I almost didn't answer because I was elbow deep in fixing someone else's incompetent pipe work and covered in drywall dust. But something made me answer. Maybe intuition, maybe dumb luck, maybe the universe deciding it was time to drop a bomb on my life and wanting to make sure I was paying attention. Carter. Her voice came through shaky and wrong, all high-pitched and panicky in a way I'd never heard before. Clara wasn't a panicker. She was the calm one, the steady one. The one who handled everything from parent-teacher conferences to flat tires without breaking a sweat. Hearing her sound like that made my stomach drop straight through the floor. "Carter, I'm at the hospital," she said, and I could hear her crying, actually sobbing into the phone. "They found something. Please come. Please, I need you right now." I didn't ask questions, didn't finish the pipe, didn't even tell my crew where I was going. I just dropped my wrench. Literally dropped it right there on the bathroom floor where it probably left a dent, wiped my hands on my jeans, and ran. Ran like a man whose entire world was actively catching fire, and the only fire extinguisher was 20 minutes away at Penrose Hospital. I drove like I was auditioning for Fast and Furious, running yellow lights that were basically red, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might need my own hospital room by the time I got there. When I found her in the waiting room, she looked small. That's the only word I have for it. Clara was 5'6" and had always carried herself with this confident energy that made her seem taller. But right then, hunched over in one of those plastic hospital chairs with her face in her hands, she looked small and scared and breakable. I'd never seen her breakable before. I sat down next to her and pulled her into my arms, and she buried her face in my chest and cried in a way that made me want to fight something, break something, fix something. But you can't punch cancer. Can't renovate your way out of it. Can't build a deck that makes it go away. What did they find? I asked quietly, even though I was pretty sure I didn't want to know the answer. She pulled back enough to look at me, her eyes red and swollen, mascara running down her cheeks. "They did some tests last week," she whispered. "I didn't tell you because I thought it was nothing. Just some pain, some irregular bleeding. But Carter, it's not nothing." And right there, in that waiting room that smelled like antiseptic and fear, holding my wife while she trembled against me, I had no idea that this moment wasn't about fighting cancer together. It was about her setting up the con of a lifetime, with me as the mark. The doctor's name was Henry Vance, and I remember thinking he looked exactly like what you'd expect a successful oncologist to look like if you were casting one for a medical drama. Tall, maybe 6'2", with salt and pepper hair that was styled just enough to look professional, but not so much that it seemed vain. He wore those expensive-looking glasses that probably cost more than my truck payment, and he had this calm, measured way of speaking that I guess was supposed to be comforting, but instead made me want to grab him by his pristine white coat and scream, "Just tell us what's wrong," until my voice gave out. We were in one of those consultation rooms that hospitals use when they need to deliver bad news in private. You know the kind. Bland beige walls, a box of tissues strategically placed on the desk like a warning sign, some generic landscape painting that was probably supposed to be soothing but just made the whole space feel more depressing. There were 3 chairs, 2 for us victims and 1 for the guy about to ruin our lives with medical terminology. Clara sat to my left, her hand gripping mine so tight I was losing circulation, but I didn't dare pull away. I just squeezed back and tried to remember how to breathe like a normal human being instead of a man waiting for an executioner to drop the axe. Dr. Vance had a folder in front of him. Seems like everyone with bad news carries folders, like the universe requires documentation for soul-crushing moments. And he opened it with the kind of careful precision that made my stomach tie itself into knots that would have impressed a Boy Scout troop leader. He looked at Clara first, then at me, and I swear to God, time slowed down. You know that feeling when you're about to get into a car accident and your brain goes into some kind of hyper-aware mode where you notice everything? The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The smell of industrial cleaner mixed with fear. The way Clara's breathing had gone shallow and rapid. The tiny coffee stain on Dr. Vance's collar that suggested even fancy doctors have bad mornings. Mr. and Mrs. Briggs, he started, his voice gentle but clinical, like he'd practiced this speech 1,000 times in front of a mirror. Probably had. I've reviewed all of Clara's test results, and I'm afraid the news isn't what we were hoping for. He paused, and I wanted to reach across that desk and fast-forward him because the suspense was physically painful. Clara, you have ovarian cancer. Stage 3. I swear to God, my heart stopped. Just completely stopped beating for a solid 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, my entire brain short-circuited like someone had dumped water on the motherboard. Cancer. Stage 3. My wife. Those 3 things didn't belong in the same sentence. They couldn't. This was Clara, who did yoga every Sunday morning, who ate salads for lunch, who lectured the kids about the importance of vitamins and drinking enough water. Healthy people didn't get cancer. People who did everything right didn't get cancer. Except apparently they did, and she had. And I was sitting in this beige nightmare of a room learning that the universe didn't give a single damn about fairness or logic or the fact that we had 2 kids who needed their mom. Clara's hand was trembling in mine, not just shaking, full-on trembling like she was freezing to death even though the room was probably 75 degrees. I turned to look at her, and her face had gone completely white, all the blood drained out of it like someone had pulled a plug. Her eyes were wide and terrified, and I watched a single tear roll down her cheek in slow motion while Dr. Vance kept talking about treatment options and survival rates and a bunch of other words that sounded like they were coming from underwater. What does that mean? I heard myself ask, and my voice sounded weird and distant, like someone else was using my mouth to talk. Stage 3. What does that mean exactly? I needed numbers, percentages, something concrete to hold on to because everything else was dissolving into chaos. Dr. Vance folded his hands on top of the folder, and I hated how practiced that gesture looked. Stage 3 means the cancer has spread beyond the ovaries into the abdominal area, he explained, and each word felt like a punch to the gut. It's advanced, but it's not stage 4. We have treatment options. Aggressive treatment options. He went on to talk about chemotherapy, possibly surgery, radiation, a whole cocktail of medical interventions that sounded like they were going to put Clara through absolute hell, and I just sat there nodding like any of it was actually registering in my brain. Clara made this sound. This small, broken sound that I'd never heard come out of her before. It wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a gasp, just this noise of pure fear and despair that made every protective instinct I had slam into overdrive. I pulled her closer, wrapped my arm around her shoulders, and felt her collapse against me like her bones had turned to liquid. "Promise me," she whispered against my chest, her voice so quiet I almost didn't hear it over the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Promise me you won't let me die." And like a complete idiot, like a man who thought love and determination could beat biology and statistics, I promised. "I won't let you die," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. "Whatever it takes, Clara, whatever it costs, we're gonna beat this thing together." I kissed the top of her head and tried to project confidence I absolutely did not feel. I was a construction guy. I built things, fixed things, made things stable and solid. Cancer wasn't something you could hammer into submission or shore up with better support beams, but damned if I wasn't going to try everything humanly possible. Dr. Vance started talking about next steps, about scheduling her first round of chemotherapy, about getting her set up with an oncology team, but I was only half listening. The other half of my brain was already spinning into crisis mode, trying to figure out logistics and money and how the hell we were going to manage this without completely destroying our lives. Our insurance was decent. I'd made sure of that when I started the business, got us on a plan that covered the important stuff, but I had no idea what decent meant when you were staring down cancer treatment. That night, after we'd left the hospital and picked up the kids from Clara's sister's house without telling them anything, because how do you explain cancer to a 14-year-old and a 12-year-old without scaring them into therapy? We sat at our kitchen table surrounded by insurance paperwork that looked like it had been written in ancient hieroglyphics by a lawyer who hated humanity. Page after page of terms and conditions, coverage limits, deductibles, copays, out-of-pocket maximums. All this bureaucratic nonsense that stood between my wife and the treatment that might save her life. I had my laptop open, a calculator next to it, and 3 different highlighters because apparently color coding made the nightmare more manageable. Clara sat across from me, still pale, still shell-shocked, watching me work through the numbers with this look on her face that I couldn't quite read. Scared, definitely, but something else too. Something I'd later realize was guilt, though at the time I was too focused on the math to notice. The numbers were bad, really bad. Our insurance covered a chunk of the treatment, sure, but the deductible alone was $15,000, and after that, we were on the hook for 20% of everything. Chemotherapy, scans, doctor visits, medications, it all added up faster than I could calculate. I ran the numbers 3 times, hoping I'd made a mistake, hoping I'd missed some clause or provision that would make it less catastrophic. But every time, I came up with roughly the same total, $290,000. Maybe more, depending on how long treatment lasted, whether she needed surgery, if there were complications. $290,000. I made decent money with the business, but we weren't rich. We had maybe $20,000 in savings. The bills didn't just arrive, they invaded. They came in waves, like some kind of financial tsunami designed specifically to drown a middle-class construction guy who thought he'd done everything right. Hospital bills, oncology bills, pharmacy bills, lab work bills, bills for tests I couldn't even pronounce. Each envelope that showed up in our mailbox was another reminder that saving my wife's life came with a price tag that would have made a mob loan shark blush. The grand total, after insurance did its pathetic little dance of, we'll cover some of it, but definitely not enough, landed at $290,000. $290,000. I kept saying it out loud, hoping that somehow repetition would make it sound less insane. It didn't work. That's the kind of money that fundamentally changes how you think about everything. Suddenly you're looking at your truck and thinking, that's worth maybe $8,000. You're looking at your tools and thinking, could probably get $1,500 for the good ones. You're looking at your wedding ring, the one you swore you'd never take off, the one that represented forever and commitment and all that romantic garbage, and thinking, maybe $300 if I find the right pawn shop. I sold my truck first. A 2015 Ford F-150 with only 73,000 miles on it, custom toolbox in the bed, running boards I'd installed myself. That truck had been with me through every job, every early morning drive to a work site, every late night haul to the hardware store. I'd eaten probably 1,000 breakfast burritos in that front seat, listened to the Broncos lose games on that radio, hauled lumber and drywall and dreams from one end of Colorado Springs to the other. My crew used to joke that I loved that truck more than I loved my wife. And I'd laugh and say the truck doesn't complain when I leave sawdust everywhere. And Clara would swap my arm, and everybody would chuckle, because it was funny and not even remotely true. I got $8,200 for it. Sold it to a kid who was probably 22 and thought he was getting the deal of a lifetime. He was so excited, talking about all the camping trips he was going to take, all the furniture he was going to help his friends move. I shook his hand, signed over the title, and watched him drive away in a vehicle that had been part of my identity for 5 years. Then I stood in the parking lot of that used car dealership and felt like I'd just sold off a piece of my soul. $8,200 toward a $290,000 problem. Only $281,800 to go. Easy. Next was my Harley. A 2007 Sportster that I'd bought used from a guy who was going through his own divorce and needed quick cash. Funny how life comes full circle like that. I'd spent 3 years restoring that bike, learning about engines, and rebuilding the carburetor myself through YouTube videos and sheer stubborn refusal to pay a mechanic. Saturday mornings, before the kids woke up, I'd take it out on the back roads outside the city, just me and the engine and the mountains, feeling like I had freedom even if it was only for an hour. That bike represented the part of me that wasn't just dad or husband or guy who owns a small business. It was the part that still felt young and reckless and alive. Got $6,000 for it. Sold it to a lawyer who probably made more in a week than I made in 6 months, who was buying it as his midlife crisis toy and would probably ride it twice before it sat in his garage gathering dust. I didn't tell him about all the work I'd put into it, all the hours I'd spent making it perfect. What was the point? He didn't care about the story. He cared about the chrome and the leather seat and being able to tell his golf buddies he owned a Harley. I took his cashier's check, walked home, because I didn't have a truck anymore, and added $6,000 to the fund. $275,800 to go. Then came the wedding ring, and that one nearly broke me. It wasn't even worth much. Clara and I had gotten married young and broke, so I'd bought what I could afford at the time. Plain gold band, probably weighed all of an ounce, had my and Clara's initials engraved inside along with our wedding date. I'd worn that ring every single day for 15 years. Through jobs where I probably should have taken it off because I was working with power tools and heavy machinery. Through fights with Clara where I'd twist it around my finger while we argued. Through moments when I'd look down at it and remember that I'd made promises, that I'd chosen this life, that I was part of something bigger than just me. The guy at the pawn shop, some dude named Rick who looked like he'd seen every sad story humanity had to offer and stopped being moved by them somewhere around 1997, barely glanced at it. Gold's going for about 1,800 an ounce right now, he said, tossing my marriage on a little scale like it was a chicken breast at the grocery store. This is 14 karat, not pure, weighs 0.3 ounces. I can give you $225. $225. 15 years of marriage, reduced to less than the cost of a decent dinner. I stood there holding that cash, looking at the tan line on my ring finger that was going to take months to fade, and I felt something inside me crack. Not break completely, not yet, but definitely crack. I added $225 to the fund. $275,575 to go. The math was getting really depressing really fast. I sold everything that wasn't nailed down. My collection of vintage hand tools that I'd inherited from my grandfather, gone. The really nice drill press I'd bought myself as a business investment, gone. Clara's engagement ring, which she'd tearfully handed over saying, "It's just a ring. Your health is more important than jewelry." Gone for $800. We had a yard sale where we sold furniture, kitchen appliances, kids' toys they'd outgrown, books, DVDs, everything. Our neighbors came by and tried to be supportive, but I could see the pity in their eyes. "So sorry about Clara," they'd say while haggling over a coffee maker. "Would you take $5 instead of $7? My crew tried to help. Bless them. These guys had been with me for years, had become more than just employees. They were friends, brothers, the kind of men who showed up when you needed them and didn't ask stupid questions. Chester Chess Pike, my foreman, was a 52-year-old former Marine who'd worked construction since before I was born. Tough as nails, heart bigger than the whole state of Colorado. The kind of guy who'd give you his last dollar and then help you figure out how to turn it into five. Chess showed up at my house one evening, knocked on the door, and when I answered, he just stood there holding an envelope. "This is $10,000, he said without preamble, trying to shove it into my hands. From my savings. For Clara's treatment." I couldn't take it. I physically could not make my hands accept that envelope. "Chess, man, I can't. It's not charity," he interrupted, his voice gruff. "It's a loan. Interest-free, unlike your wife's love, apparently." He cracked a smile at his own joke, trying to lighten the moment, but his eyes were serious. "Carter, you helped me when my daughter needed that surgery 3 years ago. Gave me time off. Kept paying me even when I wasn't working. Let me help you now." I took the money. What else was I going to do? Pride doesn't cure cancer, and I was quickly learning that dignity was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. $10,000 from Chess. Another $5,000 from my brother Lance, who worked as a mechanic and didn't have much to spare, but gave it anyway. $1,200 from Miguel, one of my crew guys who had 4 kids and should have been saving for their college, but decided my crisis was more important. $2,000 from my parents, who were retired and living on Social Security, but scraped it together somehow. The generosity of good people was keeping us afloat, and it was also killing me. Every donation, every "we're praying for you," every "let us know if you need anything else," felt like another weight on my chest. I was grateful. God, I was so grateful I couldn't even articulate it. But I was also drowning in the awareness that my wife's illness was radiating out like a shockwave, affecting everyone who cared about us. You know who didn't help? Clara's family. Not a single dollar. Her sister Margaret, who drove a BMW and lived in a house twice the size of ours, actually had the audacity to say, "If God wants Clara healed, he'll find a way." I wanted to ask if God also wanted her to keep her luxury SUV, or if divine will only apply to other people's suffering, but I bit my tongue because Clara didn't need family drama on top of everything else. Well, apparently God found his way through me with a pawn slip, an empty wallet, and a growing collection of receipts for everything I used to own. Divine intervention looks a lot like desperation when you're living it. The chemotherapy sessions started in June. Every Tuesday and Thursday, like clockwork, I'd drive Clara to the hospital in the beat-up Honda Civic we'd bought to replace my truck. A car so old it still had a CD player and an ashtray, which tells you everything you need to know about its vintage. I'd sit with her while they hooked her up to the four, watching poison drip into her veins, because sometimes the only way to kill the bad stuff is to nearly kill everything else too. She'd sit in that recliner chair, wrapped in blankets because chemo made her cold, and I'd hold her hand and try to make conversation about normal things. How Jake's football team was doing. Whether Mila's violin recital outfit needed to be dry cleaned. What we should plan in the garden next spring, as if we were making plans for a future I wasn't even sure we'd have. She got paler with each session, thinner, more fragile. Her hair started falling out in clumps, and I'd find it on her pillow, in the shower drain, on her coat. She cried the first time she noticed it coming out in her hands. I held her and whispered that she was beautiful no matter what. That hair was just hair, that we'd get through this together. We'll make it through this, I'd say, over and over, like a mantra. Like if I said it enough times, the universe would have to listen. Like determination and love could override biology and bad luck. Spoiler alert, we didn't make it through. At least not the we I thought existed. A year later, Dr. Vance said the magic words, remission. Clara's cancer was gone. Defeated. Sent packing back to whatever hell it crawled out of. I remember sitting in that same beige consultation room where we'd first gotten the diagnosis, but this time the news was good, and I cried like a child. Not the quiet, dignified tears you see in movies where a single drop rolls down someone's cheek while inspiring music plays. No, I'm talking full-on ugly crying. The kind where your face scrunches up and snot gets involved and you make sounds that don't seem human. I didn't care. My wife was alive. We'd beaten the monster. All the sacrifice, all the selling, all the sleepless nights and terror and watching her suffer through treatment. It had been worth it. Dr. Vance smiled that practiced smile of his and shook both our hands. You two fought hard, he said, like we'd been in the ring with cancer trading punches. Clara's response to treatment was remarkable. You should be very proud. I was proud. I was so relieved I felt lightheaded. I looked at Clara, expecting to see the same joy, the same overwhelming relief, but she just smiled politely and thanked the doctor. I figured she was in shock. Processing. I mean, hearing you're dying and then hearing you're not dying probably scrambles your brain a bit. We walked out of that hospital together, my arm around her shoulders, and I was already planning our future. We'd rebuild. I'd work extra jobs, get the business back on track, save up to buy back some of the stuff we'd sold. Maybe not the Harley. That ship had sailed, but other things. Important things. We'd take the kids on a real vacation, not camping, but actual hotels with pools and room service. We'd celebrate life because we'd come so close to losing it. We had a second chance, and I was going to make damn sure we didn't waste it. 2 weeks later, I came home from a job site around 6 in the evening. We'd been installing new windows in a house across town, and I was covered in caulk and sweat and looking forward to a shower and maybe grilling some burgers for dinner. I walked in through the garage like I always did, calling out, "I'm home," like I had 1,000 times before, expecting to hear Mila practicing violin or Jake yelling at his video game or Clara in the kitchen starting dinner. Instead, I found her in our bedroom with a suitcase open on the bed. Not just open, packed. Clothes folded neatly inside, shoes lined up, her toiletries bag already zipped and sitting on top. She was wearing makeup, actually styled her hair, dressed in an outfit I'd never seen before. She looked healthy, vibrant, alive. She looked like someone getting ready for a business trip or a girl's weekend, not like someone packing up to destroy her family. "What's happening?" I asked, and my voice came out weird and strangled because my brain was trying to make sense of a scene that didn't make any sense. "Where are you going? Is everything okay?" Clara didn't look at me right away. She just kept folding a sweater, this blue cashmere thing that I'd never seen her wear. That probably cost more than our monthly grocery budget. When she finally turned around, her expression was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that comes right before a Category 5 hurricane rips your house off its foundation. "I'm leaving," she said just like that. 2 words. Simple. Devastating. Like she was commenting on the weather or telling me she was running to the store for milk. I stood there in the doorway, my tool belt still hanging heavy on my hips, trying to process what she'd just said. "Leaving? What do you mean leaving? Leaving for where?" For how long? I was grasping at reasonable explanations because the unreasonable one, the real one, was too horrible to even consider. I'm leaving you, Carter. I filed for divorce 3 days ago. She said it matter-of-factly, the way you tell someone you changed your car insurance or switched to a new phone plan. No emotion, no hesitation, just cold, hard fact. The room tilted. I'm not being dramatic. The actual room felt like it physically tilted sideways. I grabbed the door frame to steady myself. Divorce? Clara, what are you talking about? We just got the all clear. You're in remission. We made it through the worst of it. We can finally start rebuilding. I don't want to rebuild, she interrupted, still folding that damn sweater. Not with you. I want a real man now. Those words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. A real man. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, waiting for her to say she was kidding or having some kind of post-traumatic stress response or literally anything that would make this make sense. But she just stood there, looking at me with this expression that was somehow both pitying and disgusted. A real man. I repeated, and I could hear my voice getting louder, anger starting to cut through the shock. What the hell does that even mean? I sold everything I owned to save your life. I worked 3 jobs. I held your hand through every chemo session. I cleaned up when you were too sick to get out of bed. I promised you we'd get through it together, and we did. What part of that wasn't real enough for you? I mean, someone who doesn't smell like sawdust and desperation, she said, and the casual cruelty in her voice was like nothing I'd ever heard from her before. This wasn't my wife. This was a stranger wearing my wife's face. Someone with actual prospects. Someone who can provide a real life. Not this. She gestured around our bedroom, the one I'd renovated with my own hands, the one with crown molding I'd installed and a headboard I'd built custom. This mediocre middle-class existence. I felt something break inside my chest. Not crack, like it had at the pawn shop. Break. Shatter completely. Mediocre? This mediocre existence is what funded your cancer treatment. Every piece of this mediocre life got sold so you could live. She had the audacity to roll her eyes. Actually rolled her eyes at me like I was being inconvenient. And I'm grateful, Carter. I really am. But gratitude doesn't mean I have to stay married to you. People change. I changed. I survived cancer, and it made me realize life's too short to settle. Settle? The word came out as a roar. I couldn't help it. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, a life we'd built together, and she was calling it settling? You're calling our family settling? Keep your voice down, she said, glancing toward the hallway. The kids are home. The kids. Jake and Mila. Oh God, the kids. Does this have something to do with them? Clara, we can work through whatever. There's nothing to work through. She zipped up the suitcase with this air of finality that made my stomach drop. I've already talked to my lawyer. His name is Marcus, by the way. Marcus Hightower. You'll be hearing from him. Her lawyer. Marcus. The way she said his name, with this little smile playing at the corners of her mouth, told me everything I needed to know. You're sleeping with your lawyer, I said, and it wasn't even a question. The pieces were falling into place in the most horrific way possible. That's none of your business anymore, she said, which was basically a confession wrapped in a refusal. She walked past me, rolling that suitcase behind her like she was heading to the airport, not abandoning her family. I followed her down the hallway, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to say, what to do, how to stop this freight train that was currently demolishing everything I'd thought was real and solid and true. Jake was in the living room, sitting on the couch with his phone, but he looked up when we came in. Mila was at the dining room table doing homework. They both knew something was wrong. You could see it in their faces, that animal instinct kids have when their world is about to implode. Mom, Mila asked, her voice small and scared. I'm going to be staying somewhere else for a while, Clara said, and I wanted to scream at her for lying, for making it sound temporary when she'd just told me she'd filed for divorce. But I'll see you both very soon. I love you. She kissed them both on the forehead, and I watched my children's faces crumple in confusion and fear. Then she walked out the front door without looking back, and I stood there like an idiot, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except watch my marriage walk away. The divorce papers arrived 2 days later. She was suing for half of everything, which was hilarious considering everything now consisted of a house with a mortgage, a beat-up Honda Civic, and business equipment I'd somehow managed not to sell. But the real kicker was that she wanted full custody of Jake and Mila. Full custody. She was taking my kids. Her lawyer, Marcus Hightower, the man she was presumably sleeping with while I'd been working 3 jobs to keep us afloat, was apparently some hotshot attorney who specialized in protecting mothers' rights. The paperwork claimed I was financially unstable, that my business was failing, that I was living beyond my means. It painted me as an irresponsible father who couldn't provide proper housing or stability. I hired the only lawyer I could afford, a guy named Ed Ramsey who worked out of a strip mall office between a nail salon and a tax preparation place. Ed was decent enough, but he was outgunned from the start. Marcus Hightower had resources, connections, and apparently no soul. Every court date, he showed up in $1,000 suits making arguments about how Clara deserved to start fresh, how she'd been through so much with her illness, how she needed support, not conflict. The judge, a woman named Patricia Hendricks who looked like she'd never had a hard day in her life, seemed to buy every word of it. She looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe. A construction worker who couldn't keep his wife happy. A man who'd let his business slide. Someone who couldn't even afford a decent lawyer. When the final ruling came down, Clara got primary custody. I got every other weekend, as long as I could provide appropriate housing. The judge took one look at the address I'd listed, room 108, Sunset Valley Motel, and actually frowned like I'd personally offended her. "Mr. Briggs," she said, peering at me over her reading glasses, "a motel room is not suitable housing for children. Visitation will be suspended until you can demonstrate you have a proper residence." I wanted to ask her what she expected me to do when my ex-wife had taken half of nothing and left me with less than that. But you don't argue with judges. You just take it and try not to break down in the courtroom. So Clara got the kids, the house, and half of what little I had left. I got a motel room, crippling depression, and the knowledge that I'd sacrificed everything to save someone who couldn't wait to throw me away the second she didn't need me anymore. That's gratitude, apparently. That's what happens when you promise to never let someone die and actually keep that promise. You die instead, just slower. Room 108 at the Sunset Valley Motel became my new definition of home, which was depressing as hell because calling it home was like calling a cardboard box under a bridge real estate. This was survival, not living. This was what happened when life stripped you down to nothing and then charged you $43 a night for the privilege of having a roof over your head and a door that locked, mostly. The room itself was exactly what you'd expect from a place that advertised weekly rates available and had a flickering neon sign out front that buzzed like a dying insect. One full-sized bed with a mattress that had seen things, felt things, and probably harbored enough DNA evidence to solve cold cases from 3 decades ago. The sheets were clean. Jerry, the manager, at least had standards about laundry, but they were that industrial white that told you they'd been bleached into submission so many times they'd given up having any personality. One pillow that was either too flat or too lumpy, depending on which side you used. A thin brown comforter that looked like it had been manufactured sometime during the Carter administration. The first one, not me. The furniture situation was equally bleak. A nightstand that wobbled if you breathed on it too hard, scarred with cigarette burns and water rings from 1,000 previous occupants who'd set down their drinks and their problems with equal carelessness. A small dresser with drawers that stuck, where I kept the few clothes I hadn't sold or lost in the divorce. A lamp with a shade that sat crooked no matter how many times I tried to straighten it, casting uneven yellow light that made everything look even more depressing than it already was. And that nightstand, God, that nightstand, had become my dinner table, my desk, my everything. I'd eat my sad canned meals off it, balance my laptop on it while I searched for jobs online, rest my forehead against it when the weight of everything got too heavy and I needed something solid to hold me up. The bathroom was its own special nightmare. A shower that had 2 temperature settings, Arctic blast or molten lava, with absolutely no middle ground. I'd learned to time my showers, jumping in and out before I either froze to death or scalded myself like a lobster. The sink dripped constantly, a rhythmic plinking sound that I'd stopped noticing after the first week because your brain can adapt to anything if it has to. The toilet ran unless you jiggled the handle just right, and the mirror had this crack in the upper right corner that made it look like I had a permanent scar on my forehead when I looked at myself, which I tried not to do often because the guy staring back at me wasn't someone I recognized anymore. Dinner was whatever came in a can. Beans, mostly. Sometimes chili if I was feeling fancy and it was on sale at the dollar store. Ravioli on special occasions, like Tuesdays, because Tuesdays were when the store marked down their dented cans. I had a whole system worked out. I'd become a professional at poverty, an expert at stretching $5 into a week's worth of meals. I kept a plastic spoon from 7-Eleven that I washed in the bathroom sink and reused because buying actual utensils felt wasteful when I was barely keeping my head above water financially. Sometimes I'd heat the cans up using the coffee maker. Yeah, you read that right. Pour the beans into the coffee pot, run hot water through it a few times, and boom, warm dinner. Was it pathetic? Absolutely. Did it work? Unfortunately, yes. Breakfast was coffee and regret, served fresh every morning around 6 when I'd wake up to that damn flickering sign outside my window. The coffee was instant. I'm talking the cheapest possible Folgers crystals that tasted like sadness dissolved in hot water. But it had caffeine, and that's all that mattered. The regret was free and unlimited, a continental breakfast of bad decisions and worse luck that I couldn't escape no matter how much I wanted to. My neighbor in room 109 was a guy I never actually met, but felt like I knew intimately because these walls were thinner than communion wafers. I could hear everything. Him crying some nights, deep, gut-wrenching sobs that would start around midnight and go until 2 or 3 in the morning. Him watching TV at volumes that suggested either hearing loss or a desperate need to drown out his thoughts. Him on the phone sometimes, arguing with someone. An ex-wife, I assumed, because the conversations had that special kind of venom that only comes from loving someone and then learning to hate them. We were trauma roommates, him and me, living parallel lives of quiet desperation separated by drywall and denial. My brother Lance kept calling, bless his heart. Every few days my phone would ring and his name would pop up, and I'd debate whether to answer because talking to people who cared about me somehow made everything feel worse. Their concern was kindness, sure, but it was also a mirror reflecting back how far I'd fallen, and I didn't need reminders. Carter, man, you can't keep living like this, Lance would say, and I could hear the worry in his voice, the big brother instinct to fix things. Mom and Dad are worried sick. Come stay with them. Come stay with me. Hell, I'll sleep on my own couch if it means you're not in that motel. Tell them not to worry, I'd say, trying to inject some humor into my voice even though humor had become a foreign language I barely spoke anymore. I'm living my minimalist dream. Just me, beans, and bad decisions. Very zen. Marie Kondo would be proud. Lance didn't laugh. He never laughed at my jokes anymore, which told me exactly how not funny they actually were. This isn't minimalism, it's depression. There's a difference. Yeah, well, depression is cheaper. Doesn't require buying special storage containers. The conversations always ended the same way. Him begging me to accept help, me deflecting with sarcasm, both of us hanging up feeling worse than before we'd talked. I knew he meant well. I knew my whole family meant well. But accepting help felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that I couldn't pull myself out of this hole through sheer willpower and determination. I was a construction worker, for God's sake. I built things. I fixed things. I made things stable and solid. The fact that I couldn't do that for my own life was a failure I wasn't ready to face. So I stayed in room 108, eating beans off a wobbly nightstand, listening to my neighbor cry through walls that might as well have been paper, trying to laugh about rock bottom because the alternative was crying, and I'd already done enough of that. Then came that knock at 2 a.m., the woman in the beige trench coat, Isabella Cross, with her leather folder and her impossible claims about my wife faking cancer. And suddenly, rock bottom discovered it had a basement. Isabella Cross set her leather folder down on my nightstand/dinner table with the kind of careful precision that suggested whatever was inside was either extremely valuable or extremely dangerous. Probably both. She smoothed out her beige trench coat and sat down in the only chair in the room, a wobbly piece of furniture that I usually threw my dirty laundry on, like she was settling into a boardroom instead of a motel room that smelled like failure and canned beans. Mr. Briggs, she said, looking at me with those sharp, intelligent eyes that missed absolutely nothing. I need you to understand something before I show you what's in this folder. What you're about to learn is going to fundamentally change your understanding of the past 2 years. It's going to make you angry, probably make you want to break something, maybe make you question your entire reality. She paused, letting that sink in. But I need you to stay calm and let me explain everything before you react. Can you do that? I sat down on the edge of my saga bed, still in my stained undershirt and sweatpants, feeling like I'd been dropped into a spy movie except I was the world's least qualified protagonist. Lady, my wife divorced me after I sold everything I owned to pay for her cancer treatment, took my kids, and is now shacked up with her lawyer. My reality is already pretty thoroughly questioned. Whatever you've got in that folder can't possibly make things worse. Isabella's expression suggested I was adorably naive. We'll see about that. She opened the folder, and I saw it was stuffed with papers, photographs, bank statements, the kind of documentation that takes serious time and resources to compile. Your wife doesn't know I'm here, she repeated. And before you ask why I'm telling you this, you should know that my client, the person who hired me to investigate Clara, cares about you very much and has been working quietly behind the scenes for months to get you this information. Who hired you? I asked, my brain trying to run through the list of people who'd give enough of a damn to hire a private investigator. The list was short and confusing. We'll get to that, she said, pulling out the first document. It was a medical report from Penrose Hospital with Clara's name on it. Let's start with the basics. Mr. Briggs, your wife Clara never had cancer. The words hit my ears, but my brain refused to process them. It was like she'd just told me the sky was actually green or gravity had been a hoax this whole time. What? She never had cancer, Isabella repeated, slower this time, watching my face carefully. Not stage 3 ovarian cancer. Not stage anything. She faked the entire diagnosis with the help of Dr. Henry Vance. I laughed. I couldn't help it. The sound came out harsh and brittle, the kind of laugh that makes people back away slowly because they think you're losing your mind. Maybe I was. That's insane. I was at the appointments. I saw the test results. I watched her go through chemo. She lost her hair. She was sick. She was receiving vitamin infusions, Isabella interrupted, pulling out more papers. Dr. Vance has a very interesting side business where he helps wealthy patients fake illnesses for various reasons. Insurance fraud, mostly, sometimes extortion. In Clara's case, it was simpler. She wanted to drain you financially and emotionally, then leave once she'd taken everything you had. She spread photographs across my nightstand. Pictures of Clara and Dr. Vance at a restaurant, laughing. Bank statements showing transfers from my accounts to offshore locations. Medical records, the real ones, showing Clara had never been sick at all. Each piece of evidence was like a punch to the gut, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except stare at this impossible documentation of an impossible betrayal. The chemotherapy sessions, Isabella continued in that calm, professional voice, were saline and vitamin B12. Sometimes they'd add something to make her feel slightly nauseous so the symptoms seemed real. The hair loss was from a chemical depilatory she applied herself. Every symptom, every test result, every doctor's note, all fabricated. I picked up one of the bank statements with shaking hands. It showed a transfer of $15,000 from our joint account to something called Clearwater Holdings LLC in the Cayman Islands. The date was from 7 months ago, right in the middle of Clara's treatment. What is this? That's where your money went, Isabella said. Every time you paid a medical bill, which Dr. Vance made sure looked completely legitimate, a portion of it was funneled into offshore accounts that Clara had set up. The hospital was real. The billing department was real. But the treatments? Those were theater. Very expensive, very elaborate theater designed to bankrupt you. I stood up, pacing in the tiny space between the bed and the wall, my hands shaking so badly I had to shove them in my pockets. My wife's chemo was basically a vitamin smoothie. The absurdity of it was almost funny. Almost. I sold my truck, my motorcycle, my wedding ring. I took money from my crew, from my family, my voice cracked, and I had to stop talking because the alternative was either screaming or crying, and I wasn't sure which would come out first. I know, Isabella said quietly. I'm sorry. I know this is. You don't know anything. I shouted, and I didn't care if my crying neighbor or Randy the drunk or the fighting couple heard me. I promised her I wouldn't let her die. I worked 3 jobs. I ate canned beans for months. I lost my business, my house, my kids. I grabbed the edge of the nightstand to steady myself because the room was spinning. Tell me you're wrong. Tell me you made a mistake, that this is some kind of... I'm not wrong, Isabella said. and her voice had this terrible certainty that made everything real. Dr. Vance confessed. Not to the police yet, that's coming, but to my investigators. We have recordings. Clara faked cancer to financially destroy you, and she did it with the help of a doctor who's been running this scam for years. I sank back down onto the bed, my legs giving out. Turns out there was a bottom below rock bottom, and I just found it. It was discovering that the worst year of your life had been manufactured, deliberately, by the person you'd loved most in the world. Why? I managed to ask. Why would she do this? Isabella pulled out another photograph. This one showed Clara with a man I didn't recognize. Expensive suit, perfectly styled hair, the kind of guy who looked like he'd never worried about money a day in his life. They were at what looked like a fancy restaurant, holding hands across the table. This is Trevor Ashworth, investment banker, worth about $8 million. Clara met him 2 years ago at a charity gala her sister dragged her to. They started an affair, and according to our investigation, she decided she wanted out of your marriage but needed a way to take as much money as possible on her way out the door. So she faked cancer. I said it out loud, trying to make it make sense. It didn't. So she faked cancer, Isabella confirmed. The plan was brilliant, honestly. She gets you to liquidate everything to pay for her treatment. She gets sympathy from everyone. She looks like a brave survivor. And then once you're completely broke, she leaves you for someone who can give her the lifestyle she actually wants. By the time you figured out what happened, if you ever figured it out, she'd be long gone with your money and you'd be too destroyed to fight back. Marcus Hightower, I said, remembering Clara's lawyer. Her boyfriend, the one she's living with now. Also part of it, Isabella said. Trevor Ashworth is her actual boyfriend. Marcus Hightower is her lawyer/accomplice who made sure the divorce went exactly how she wanted it. Full custody, half your assets, you living in a motel, unable to see your kids. It was all planned, Carter. Every bit of it. I looked at the pile of evidence on my nightstand. Photos, bank records, fake medical documents, real medical documents, transcripts of conversations between Clara and Dr. Vance discussing their business arrangement. It was all there. Undeniable. Real. My wife's miracle recovery wasn't from beating cancer. It was from counting cash. From successfully executing a con that destroyed my entire life while making her look like a brave survivor. I need to know who hired you, I said, my voice hoarse. Who's been investigating this? Who knew? Isabella smiled slightly. Your father, Raymond Briggs. He suspected something was off when Clara refused to let your parents visit her during treatments. Said she didn't want them to see her like this. Your mother kept calling, kept asking to help, and Clara always had an excuse. That raised red flags for your dad. He's a smart man. My father, Raymond Briggs, retired electrician, Korean War veteran, the most stubborn man I'd ever met. Of course he'd suspected something. Of course he hadn't let it go. He hired me 6 months ago, Isabella continued. Quietly. Didn't want to tell you until he had proof because he knew you'd defend Clara, knew you'd think he was being paranoid. Your brother Lance helped too, tracked some of the money transfers, noticed discrepancies in the medical billing. Even your mother contributed by keeping detailed notes of every conversation she had with Clara, every excuse, every inconsistency. Your whole family has been running what amounts to a private investigation operation while you were selling your possessions to save someone who was never sick. I thought about all those phone calls from Lance I'd ignored. All the voicemails from my parents I'd deleted. They'd been trying to help me, trying to save me, and I'd been too buried in my own misery to notice. What happens now? I asked. Isabella's expression turned serious. Now, we take this evidence to the FBI. Clara and Dr. Vance will be arrested for fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, and about a dozen other charges. Marcus Hightower will be disbarred and probably face criminal charges for his role. The offshore accounts will be frozen and the money recovered. Well, most of it. And my kids. Your kids already know, she said gently. Your parents told them 2 days ago. Jake and Mila are staying with your mom and dad right now. They wanted to be the ones to tell them the truth. Wanted them somewhere safe when everything came crashing down. Your daughter asked me to tell you that she misses you and she's sorry she believed her mother's lies. Something broke loose in my chest, something that had been locked tight for months. My kids knew. They knew their mother had lied. Knew I hadn't abandoned them. Knew that everything I'd done had been because I loved them. For the first time in 6 months, I could actually breathe. When? I asked. When do they arrest her? Isabella checked her watch. About 6 hours from now. The FBI is coordinating with local police. They'll pick up Dr. Vance at his home and Clara at Marcus Hightower's condo where she's been living. It's going to be a media circus. Doctor who faked cancer diagnoses for profit, wealthy woman who conned her husband. The story has everything. I looked around room 108. At the flickering lamp and the stained carpet and the stack of empty bean cans in the corner. This had been my rock bottom. But rock bottom, I was learning, could also be a foundation. You could build on rock bottom. Hell, I built on concrete for a living, and rock bottom was made of pretty much the same stuff. Thank you, I said to Isabella, for doing this, for giving me the truth. She stood up, gathering her folder. Thank your father. He's the one who never gave up on you. She pulled a business card from her pocket and set it on the nightstand. That's my number if you need anything. The FBI will want to interview you tomorrow. For now, I suggest you call your family. They've been waiting a long time to hear from you. After she left, I sat in room 108 holding that business card, staring at the evidence of my wife's betrayal spread across my nightstand. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel completely hopeless. I felt angry. And anger, it turns out, is a much better fuel than despair. I called my dad at 3 in the morning. Didn't even think about the time, just pulled out my phone and hit his number before I could talk myself out of it. He answered on the second ring, voice alert and clear like he'd been waiting by the phone. Knowing my father, he probably had been. Carter. His voice cracked slightly on my name, and I realized this was the first time we'd actually spoken in 2 months. I'd been avoiding everyone, drowning in my own misery, too proud or too ashamed to reach out. Son, are you okay? Isabella Cross just left, I said, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, rough from months of not saying much of anything to anyone. She told me everything. Dad, what the hell were you thinking, running a full investigation without telling me? There was a pause, and I heard him take a deep breath. I was thinking my son was being destroyed by a woman who didn't deserve him, and I needed proof before I could help him see it. You loved her, Carter. If I'd come to you 6 months ago saying I thought Clara was faking cancer, would you have believed me? He was right, and we both knew it. I would have thought he was crazy, would have defended Clara, probably would have cut him off for even suggesting something so horrible. No, I admitted. I would have told you to mind your own business and hung up on you. Exactly. So your mother and I decided to mind our business by hiring the best private investigator in Colorado Springs and building a case that even you couldn't deny. I could hear the steel in his voice, that stubborn determination that had gotten him through war and poverty and 50 years of marriage to my equally stubborn mother. Nobody hurts my son and gets away with it. I don't care if she had 100 fake doctors backing her up. I laughed, and this time it wasn't bitter or broken. It was real. You hired a PI while I was living in a motel eating beans out of a can. We would have helped you sooner, but we needed time to gather evidence, he said, and I heard regret in his voice. Every time your mother wanted to drive over there and drag you home, I had to remind her that we were playing the long game, that we needed to let Clara think she'd won so she'd get sloppy. It killed us, son. Watching you suffer like that and not being able to tell you why we needed you to wait just a little longer. How long have you known? I asked, sitting down on my bed because my legs felt shaky again. When did you figure out it was all fake? I suspected from the beginning, Dad said. When Clara told us about the diagnosis, something felt off. Your mother wanted to come to the hospital, wanted to be there for the appointments, and Clara kept making excuses. The doctors don't allow visitors. It's too stressful to have people around. I need Carter to be my only support right now. Every excuse in the book to keep us away. That's not how cancer patients act, Carter. When you're fighting for your life, you want your family close. You don't push them away. I thought about all those appointments where it had been just me and Clara, how she'd insisted on privacy, on handling it our way, on not burdening anyone else with her struggle. I thought it was about dignity. Turns out it was about maintaining the con. Lance figured out the money trail about 4 months ago, Dad continued. He was helping you with your business taxes, saw some of the medical bills, and something didn't add up. The amounts were too round, too convenient. Real medical billing is a mess. Random charges, weird codes, nickel-and-diming you for every cotton swab. These bills looked like someone had created them from a template. So he started digging, found the offshore accounts, traced the transfers. My little brother was running forensic accounting on my wife. I said, shaking my head in disbelief. Your little brother loves you and knows his way around spreadsheets, Dad corrected. Between Lance's financial investigation and Isabella's surveillance, we built a case that the FBI couldn't ignore. Even your mother contributed. She kept every text message Clara ever sent her, every voicemail, cataloged every lie and inconsistency. Your mom might seem sweet, but she's got a memory like a steel trap and a grudge like you wouldn't believe. I imagine my tiny, 5'2" mother sitting at her kitchen table with a notebook, documenting every interaction with Clara like she was gathering intelligence for the CIA. The image was both hilarious and deeply touching. The kids, I said, my voice dropping. Isabella said Jake and Mila know everything. How are they handling it? Dad's voice softened. They're angry, confused. Mila cried for 2 hours when we told her. Jake punched a hole in our garage wall. I'll send you the repair bill. He was joking, trying to lighten the moment, but I could hear the pain underneath. But they're also relieved, son. They thought you'd abandoned them. Thought you'd stopped caring. When we explained what really happened, that you'd sold everything trying to save their mother, that the court wouldn't let you see them because of the motel. Carter, your daughter said, I knew Dad wouldn't just leave us. I knew there had to be a reason. I put my hand over my face, feeling tears I'd been holding back for months finally breaking through. My kids had faith in me, even when I'd lost faith in myself. They'd known, somewhere deep down, that something wasn't right. They want to see you, Dad added. Tomorrow, after the arrests. Your mother's making pot roast, your favorite. We'll all be there. Your family, son. The people who never stopped believing in you, even when you'd given up on yourself. I'm sorry, I said, and the words felt inadequate for everything I needed to apologize for. I'm sorry I shut you all out. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. I'm sorry I... Stop, Dad interrupted firmly. You were a good husband doing everything you could to save your wife. There's no shame in that. The shame belongs to Clara and everyone who helped her. You were the victim here, Carter, not the villain. Don't you dare apologize for having a heart. We talked for another 20 minutes, about the FBI raid happening in a few hours, about what would happen to Clara and Dr. Vance, about the house that Dad had apparently bought the day I sold it, keeping it in trust until I could come home. He'd planned for my return before I even knew I'd be returning. Had faith I'd rebuild before I believed I could. One more thing, Dad said before we hung up. Chess called me last week. Him and the rest of your crew. They want Briggs Custom Homes back up and running. Said they've been turning down jobs for 6 months waiting for their boss to come back. You've got a crew ready to work the second you're ready to lead them. My crew. Chess, Miguel, Tommy, the guys who'd stood by me, who'd offered their own money, who'd apparently been waiting all this time for me to find my way back. I hadn't just lost a business. I'd abandoned people who depended on me. And they'd waited anyway. Tell them I'll see them Monday, I said, and I meant it. After I hung up, I looked around room 108 one last time. The flickering lamp, the stained carpet, the stack of bean cans that represented my lowest point. This room had been my prison and my penance, the place where I'd learned that rock bottom had a foundation. And foundations, I knew better than anyone, were exactly what you needed to start building something new. Tomorrow, the FBI would arrest my ex-wife for fraud. Tomorrow, I'd see my kids for the first time in 3 months. Tomorrow, I'd start putting my life back together with the help of a family who'd never stopped fighting for me, even when I'd stopped fighting for myself. But tonight, I was still in room 108, surrounded by evidence of my wife's betrayal and my family's love, learning that sometimes the knock at your door at 2 a.m. isn't disaster. Sometimes it's salvation wearing a beige trench coat. The next morning, the FBI raided Clara and Marcus Hightower's luxury condo in the nice part of town. You know, the part where people have doormen and heated garage parking and probably don't know what canned beans taste like. I wasn't there to see it happen, but Isabella called me at 7 a.m. to give me the play-by-play like she was reporting on a sports game. They got her, she said, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Clara, Dr. Vance, and Marcus Hightower, all in custody. The look on her face when they put the handcuffs on was, and I quote from the agent who called me, absolutely priceless. I should have felt triumphant, vindicated, something big and dramatic. Instead, I just felt tired and sad and oddly empty, like I'd been carrying a massive weight for so long that now that it was gone, I didn't quite know what to do with my arms. What are the charges? I asked. Fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, falsifying medical documents, and the DA is considering adding extortion. Isabella rattled off like she was reading a grocery list. Dr. Vance is looking at 15 to 20 years. Clara and Marcus are probably looking at 10 to 15 each, depending on plea deals. The FBI froze all the offshore accounts. They recovered about $240,000 of your money so far. $240,000. Not all of it, but most of it. Money I'd thought was gone forever. Money I'd made peace with never seeing again. What happens to it now? It'll be held as evidence during the trial, then returned to you once everything's settled. Probably 6 months to a year. In the meantime, you should talk to a lawyer about going after Clara's assets. The house, her car, whatever she bought with your money while she was pretending to be sick. The house. My house. The one my dad had bought and been holding for me. I don't want her stuff, I said. I just want my kids and my life back. Fair enough, Isabella said. The FBI will want to interview you today. I'll text you the address and time. And Carter? Congratulations. You survived. After we hung up, I sat in room 108 for a while, just processing. Clara was in jail. Dr. Vance was in jail. The people who'd conspired to destroy my life were facing actual consequences. It felt surreal, like I was watching it happen to someone else. Eventually, I showered, choosing molten lava over Arctic freeze because at least burning alive felt like something. Got dressed in the least wrinkled clothes I owned, and drove my beat-up Honda Civic to my parents' house. My father was waiting on the front porch when I pulled up, standing there in his flannel shirt and work boots like he'd been keeping watch. When I got out of the car, he walked down the steps and pulled me into a hug that nearly cracked my ribs. Raymond Briggs wasn't a hugger. The man showed love through actions, not affection. But he held on to me like I might disappear if he let go. "Welcome home, son," he said quietly. Inside, my mother had gone completely overboard. The dining room table was covered with food: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, homemade rolls, apple pie cooling on the counter. Enough food to feed a small army or one very emotionally damaged construction worker. She burst into tears the second she saw me, and suddenly I was being hugged by a tiny woman who barely came up to my shoulder but somehow made me feel completely safe. Then I heard footsteps on the stairs, and there they were. Jake and Mila, my kids. Jake had grown at least 2 inches since I'd last seen him 3 months ago, all gangly teenage limbs and uncertain expressions. Mila looked smaller somehow, more fragile, her violin case clutched in one hand like a security blanket. "Dad." Mila's voice was tiny, questioning, like she wasn't sure I was real. I dropped to my knees right there in my parents' entryway, and she ran to me. Just straight up ran and crashed into me, wrapping her skinny 12-year-old arms around my neck and sobbing into my shoulder. Jake followed slower, trying to maintain that teenage cool, but failing spectacularly when he joined the hug, and I felt his shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," I kept saying, over and over. "I'm so sorry I couldn't see you. I'm so sorry you thought I left. I would never leave you. Never. We know," Jake said, his voice cracking in that way teenage boys' voices do. "Grandpa told us everything. About the fake cancer and the money and all of it. Mom's a..." He stopped himself, glancing at my mother. "Your mom made very bad choices," I said carefully, because they didn't need me trashing Clara even if she deserved it. They'd figure out how they felt about her on their own time. But none of that was your fault. And none of it changes how much I love you both. We stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the floor in a pile of relief and tears and family, until my mother announced that dinner was getting cold and we should eat before the pot roast became pot jerky. Dinner was chaotic and perfect. Lance showed up with his wife, Sarah, and we all crowded around the table like Thanksgiving had come early. My dad told embarrassing stories about my childhood. My mom kept putting more food on my plate like she was trying to compensate for 6 months of canned beans in one meal. Mila sat pressed against my side the entire time, like she was afraid I'd vanish if she stopped touching me. Jake asked if I was going to restart the business, and when I said yes, his whole face lit up. "Can I help?" he asked. "After school and on weekends? I could learn, like an apprentice or whatever." The idea of my football-obsessed son wanting to learn construction made my throat tight. "Yeah, buddy, you can help." After dinner, my dad walked me outside and handed me a manila envelope. Inside was the deed to my old house, the one I'd sold, the one he'd bought the same day. "Bought it the day you sold it," he said, confirming what Isabella had told me. Knew you'd come back eventually. Knew you'd need a home to come back to. I stared at the deed, at my name on the paperwork that my father had been holding in trust. Dad, I don't know how to thank you. Don't need thanks. Just need you to rebuild. Show that woman that she didn't break you. She just made you stronger. He clapped me on the shoulder. Your crew called. Chess, Miguel, Tommy, all of them. They're ready to work Monday morning if you are. Monday morning. 3 days away. 3 days to go from rock bottom to reconstruction. Tell them I'll be there. The following Monday, I showed up at the Briggs Custom Homes workshop at 6 a.m. It was a small building I'd been renting before everything went to hell. Needed some repairs and a good cleaning after 6 months of sitting empty, but it was still standing. Still solid. Chess was already there, leaning against his truck with a coffee in hand and a grin on his weathered face. Boss is back, he announced to the empty parking lot. One by one, the crew showed up. Miguel with his tool belt and terrible jokes. Tommy with his vintage lunchbox and endless supply of podcast recommendations. Danny, Marcus, not the lawyer, different Marcus, and Kevin. My guys. The team I'd thought I'd lost. They all stood there in the early morning light, looking at me like I was supposed to give some kind of inspirational speech. Let's build something, I said, because what else was there to say? And we did. We reopened Briggs Custom Homes with my father handling the books because I'd learned my lesson about managing finances during a crisis. We took on small jobs first, deck repairs, bathroom renovations, the bread and butter work that kept the lights on. Jake started coming by after school, learning how to use a level and read blueprints. Mila would do her homework in the office, then play violin in the workshop, claiming the acoustics were better with all the sawdust. She wasn't wrong. Life wasn't perfect. I still had nightmares about opening envelopes and finding bills. I still flinched when anyone mentioned hospitals. The trust issues were going to take years of therapy to work through. But I had my kids back. I had my business back. I had a family who'd fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. I even kept my old motel key from room 108. Hung it on the wall in my workshop, right next to my business license. Not as a reminder of shame, but as proof that rock bottom isn't the end of your story. It's just the foundation for whatever comes next. 6 months after Clara's arrest, Isabella Cross called me again. I was at a job site installing custom cabinets in a kitchen renovation when her name popped up on my phone screen. For a second, my stomach dropped because the last time she'd called with news, my entire world had flipped upside down. But I answered anyway, stepping outside into the cold November air while Jake and Chess argued about the proper way to mount cabinet hardware. Carter, Isabella said, skipping the pleasantries because that wasn't her style. I've got a situation and I thought of you. That sounds ominous, I said, watching my breath make clouds in the freezing air. Please tell me Clara didn't escape from jail. Nothing like that. She's still very much behind bars, and Dr. Vance just pled guilty to 47 counts of fraud across multiple states. He's looking at 25 years. I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Isabella really hated people who conned innocent victims. No, this is different. I've got another case. A man whose wife is claiming she has cancer. Stage 4 breast cancer, to be specific. He's already started selling his possessions to pay for treatment. My blood went cold. Please tell me you're joking. I wish I was. His name is David Chun. He's a high school teacher in Denver, married 15 years, 2 kids. His wife Michelle started treatment 3 months ago. He's already sold his car, taken out a second mortgage, borrowed money from his parents. Sound familiar? It sounded horrifically familiar. Like listening to my own story being played back to me on repeat. What makes you think it's fake? His brother-in-law hired me. Said something felt off about the whole thing. Same red flags your dad noticed. No family allowed at appointments, weird billing patterns, and the wife suddenly being very interested in offshore investment opportunities. Isabella paused. I did some preliminary investigating. The doctor's name is Richard Pemberton. Want to guess who he went to medical school with? Henry Vance, I said, already knowing the answer. Bingo. Looks like Dr. Vance wasn't the only one running this scam. Pemberton's been operating the same way. Fake diagnoses, vitamin infusions disguised as chemo, elaborate billing schemes. I've got enough for a warrant, but I thought you might want to talk to David before the FBI shows up and turns his life into a circus. I thought about David Chun, some high school teacher I'd never met, going through exactly what I'd gone through. selling everything he owned to save someone who was lying to him, working multiple jobs, eating ramen, losing sleep, sacrificing everything for a woman who was counting his money instead of her remaining days. The rage that swept through me was white-hot and immediate. "Give me his address," I said. "I'll talk to him." 2 days later, I drove to Denver and knocked on David Chin's door at 7 in the evening. He answered looking exactly how I'd looked 6 months ago, exhausted, defeated, wearing clothes that had seen better days, and an expression that suggested he'd forgotten what hope felt like. He was maybe 40, Asian American, with dark circles under his eyes that could have been trenches. "David Chun," I asked. "If you're here about money, I don't have any," he said tiredly. "If you're here about the second mortgage, I'm working on it. If you're here to tell me about Jesus, I appreciate the thought, but I'm really not in the—" "I'm here about your wife's cancer," I interrupted. "And I need you to listen to me very carefully, because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound insane, but it's going to save your life." He stared at me like I'd just spoken Martian. "Who the hell are you?" "My name is Carter Briggs. 6 months ago, my wife faked having cancer to drain me financially. She worked with a doctor named Henry Vance to create fake medical records, fake treatments, fake everything. I sold my truck, my motorcycle, my wedding ring, borrowed money from everyone I knew, and worked myself into the ground trying to save her. Then she divorced me, took my kids, and ran off with her boyfriend. Sound like a nightmare?" David's face had gone pale. That's horrible, but what does that have to? "Your wife's doctor, Richard Pemberton, went to medical school with Henry Vance," I said, pulling out the folder Isabella had given me. "They've been running the same scam. Your wife doesn't have stage 4 breast cancer, David. She's been receiving vitamin infusions and saline. Every bill you've paid has been funneled into offshore accounts. The FBI is going to raid Dr. Pemberton's office in 72 hours, and your wife is going to be arrested for fraud." I watched him process this information, saw the denial flash across his face, then the anger, then the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, I was telling the truth and his wife wasn't dying. He took the folder from me with shaking hands and started going through the documents. Bank statements showing transfers from his accounts to Cayman Island Holdings, surveillance photos of Michelle Chun meeting with Dr. Pemberton at expensive restaurants, medical records showing she'd never actually had cancer. "This can't be real," he whispered, but his voice said he knew it was. "Michelle wouldn't. We have kids. We have a family. She wouldn't do this." "Clara had kids too," I said quietly. "2 of them. Didn't stop her. These women, they see an opportunity, they take it. They don't care who they destroy in the process." David sank down onto his front steps, still holding the folder, and I sat down next to him. We stayed there in silence for a while. 2 men who'd been conned by the people they'd loved most, watching cars drive by on a street in Denver while the weight of betrayal settled over us like snow. "What do I do?" he finally asked. "You call the FBI," I said. "You cooperate with the investigation. You get your money back, most of it anyway. You protect your kids, and then you rebuild." I pulled out my business card and handed it to him. "And if you need someone to talk to who actually understands what you're going through, you call me. Anytime, day or night. Because the thing about hitting rock bottom is that you don't have to do it alone." David took the card, his hands still trembling. "Did you rebuild? After everything that happened to you?" I thought about Briggs Custom Homes running at full capacity again. About Jake learning to use a circular saw and Mila playing Beethoven in my workshop. About Sunday dinners at my parents' house where my mom still tried to feed me enough food to make up for 6 months of canned beans. About the motel key hanging on my workshop wall as a reminder that I'd survived the unsurvivable. "Yeah," I said. "I rebuilt. It wasn't easy, and it took a lot of help from people who refused to give up on me. But I rebuilt. And you will too." 3 days later, Michelle Chun and Dr. Richard Pemberton were arrested. The FBI recovered almost all of David's money. He called me a week after that to thank me, his voice stronger than it had been on his front steps. "My kids know the truth now," he said. "And my brother-in-law, the one who hired the investigator, he's helping me find a good therapist. I think I'm going to be okay." "You are going to be okay," I told him. "And when you are, maybe you pass it forward. Help the next guy who doesn't see it coming." That became my thing, actually. Isabella would call when she found cases that looked like the Vance Pemberton scam, and I'd go talk to the victims. Sometimes they believed me right away. Sometimes they told me to get off their property and stop slandering their wives. But I kept showing up because I knew what it was like to be so deep in the con that you couldn't see daylight. And sometimes all it takes is one person telling you the truth to save your life. On a cold December evening, I attended Mila's violin recital at the high school auditorium. She was performing a solo, Vivaldi's Winter from the Four Seasons, which she'd been practicing for months. I sat in the audience between my parents, with Jake on my other side trying to look cool, but obviously proud of his little sister, and Lance and Sarah behind us making the whole thing feel like a family affair. When Mila walked onto that stage in her black dress, carrying her violin like it was made of glass and magic, I felt my throat get tight. This girl had believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, had faith that her dad hadn't abandoned her even when every piece of evidence suggested otherwise, had waited 3 months to see me again and never once blamed me for the custody ruling. She started playing, and the whole auditorium went silent. The music poured out of her violin like liquid gold, beautiful and haunting and technically perfect. I watched her fingers fly across the strings, watched her close her eyes and lose herself in the music, and I thought about how close I'd come to missing this. How if Isabella hadn't knocked on my door at 2:13 a.m., if my father hadn't hired her, if my family hadn't fought for me when I'd stopped fighting for myself, I wouldn't be here. I'd probably still be in room 108 eating beans and wondering where my life had gone wrong. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. Mila opened her eyes, found me in the audience, and smiled. Just smiled. And in that smile was forgiveness and love and the promise that we were going to be okay. All of us. After the recital, my father pulled me aside in the parking lot while everyone else was loading into cars and arguing about where to go for celebratory ice cream. He put his hand on my shoulder, that same firm, steady grip that had held me up my entire life, and said, "Told you love would rebuild you." I smiled, thinking about Jake learning construction, Mila playing violin in sawdust, David Chun getting his life back, all the men I'd helped since then. "Yeah, Dad. But next time, I'm getting a receipt." He laughed, and we walked back to join our family. These days, I tell my story to anyone who'll listen. Not because I want sympathy or attention, but because somewhere out there is another Carter Briggs getting conned by another Clara. Another David Chin selling his car to save someone who's planning to leave him bankrupt and broken. And if my story can help even one person see the truth before it's too late, then maybe all that suffering meant something. I rebuilt my life from nothing, took the foundation of rock bottom and constructed something solid and true on top of it. My business is thriving. My kids are happy and healthy and learning that resilience is more valuable than perfection. My crew shows up every morning ready to build other people's dreams. And every time I look at that motel key hanging in my workshop, I remember that the worst moment of your life doesn't have to define you. Sometimes the knock at your door at 2:13 in the morning isn't bad news. Sometimes it's life handing you a second chance, preferably wearing a beige trench coat and holding a folder full of evidence that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than living a lie. And sometimes rock bottom is exactly where you need to be before you can build something that actually lasts.